Hello, welcome back, AI curious folk, to AI Rambling, and it's episode 54. I'm your host and AI guide, Michael Parekh. Thanks for joining us. Busy week again, Tuesday. I know it already feels like almost the whole week's gone by, but there's a lot of talk about. The core thing that's been rattling around in my mind is a thing that I've said for a long time, that especially in early tech, two opposite things can be true at the same time. This is a theme that I discussed in today's AI Reset to Zero RTZ piece, number 1056. And in there, I actually talked about three things can be true about AI at the same time. There's a broad discussion around how today's world of AI users are utterly divided and debating the issue of being power users, doubters, and resistors. There's a lot of stuff going on and some unfortunate incidents of violence against Sam Altman in San Francisco. Hopefully, no one was hurt. The perpetrators were captured. But the broader theme is it almost evokes Charles Dickens' The Best of Times, Worst of Times in terms of the world of AI. You know, as a case of example, are just the two leading AI companies we've talked about in the last few episodes and notes, Anthropic and OpenAI, both on the verge of releasing their next generation models. Mythos from Anthropic, Spud, it's a code name from OpenAI, and both have chosen to basically go out to, before releasing these models, to go out to the world of technology partners, governments, companies, particularly across major industries like financials, etc., and say, hey guys, these models are so capable that more likely than not, they will be used by bad guys, whether it's at the state level, private hacker level, to do bad things. And so see what you can do to be ready for this as we release it. So in many ways, you know, there's good stuff here and bad stuff, particularly in the context of Anthropic, which has a history of being alarmist about new models, even going back as far as GPT-2, when the founder CEO of Anthropic today was actually a co-founder of OpenAI. He worked there, and he put out similar sounding alarmist statements back then, talking about, hey, this stuff is going to do more harm if we're not ready, which is the right thing to kind of do. Get people ready for these potentialities. At the same time, it garners a reputation of the boy who cried wolf. But this time, it feels like the risks potentially are palpable. We've seen recently as yesterday, the CEO of Goldman Sachs on his earnings call, David Solomon from my alma mater, the firm, he said, yeah, we're very hyper aware of what these models are capable of and very focused on it. So in many ways, Anthropic and OpenAI are essentially setting themselves up as the guardians of the AI galaxy, as it were. These are the heroes against all manner of AI villains. And yes, the models are very capable and they're getting better exponentially. We'll see what these models do particularly soon. But what I wanted to talk about today, and you can read the broader aspect of the three opposites things being true, etc., in the written post. But what I want to talk about here on AI Ramblings in episode 54 are a couple of news events that kind of highlight this best of times, worst of time dynamic. So first up is OpenAI's chief revenue officer Dresser basically making some statements at some gatherings where she said that they are seeing staggering demand via their partner Amazon, which just recently cut a $50 billion investment deal, circular investment deal where Amazon invests in OpenAI. OpenAI provides their models to Amazon to sell and host them on Amazon's AWS service, which, by the way, is the largest hosting service out there, ahead of companies like Microsoft Azure and, of course, Google Cloud. Microsoft Azure, everyone should remember, is OpenAI's original OG partner from 2019, having invested over $13 billion in OpenAI. And for the longest time, those two had commitments to not stray from each other. In other words, OpenAI was committed to using just Azure to host its models. But now, with these new changes in their deal, they can host their models on other services. And OpenAI's revenue office is saying, hey, we're seeing staggering demand on the Amazon side as opposed to the Microsoft side. And so there's a little bit of shade and so on that's going on there. But corporate politics and so on aside, the core thing I wanted to talk about here is that there is absolutely some evidence that there's a lot of curiosity and adoption by enterprises, large, medium, and small, at just unprecedented scale, trying to access these models, trying to figure these things out. So that's the best of times aspect of this, and this little peek that we get from OpenAI's executive is a case in point. The other side of the equation is this other story I wanted to, and all of these links will be in the show notes. So there'll be specific things you can look at in detail. I just want to kind of highlight these for you. Is that, and it's a theme that I've talked about for a long time, which is that there is a long, hard road for enterprise AI diffusion, meaning companies, large, medium, and small, adopting AI, figuring this out, and actually using it in a productive way where their employees are augmented, serving customers, making better products, etc. And the specific item that I wanted to highlight was a very interesting post by Aaron Levy, who's the founder CEO of Box, an enterprise storage company, very smart fellow. And he had a post up on Twitter which had like 8 points. He just had been on a bit of a roadshow around the country, talking to business customers, and got a good sense of what people are doing with AI. And a couple of key points to highlight. There is absolutely a very fast transition going on, as you'd expect, from AI being used as chatbot search, enhanced search kind of capabilities, AI used in an agentic form within companies. So that's the good news. The bad news is that means that these companies have to literally change their posture on a dime, where they had these plans for rolling out, diffusing, as it were, the chatbot part of their capabilities, but now all of a sudden they have to introduce and get their entire company and supply chain and ecosystems familiar with the agentic part of the services. So that takes a lot of additional investment, additional training, additional reformulations of products and services, in many cases patching them on to existing products and services, and hopefully in some cases creating AI native services. The reason I'm going into the weeds of this is because this is hard work and it takes time. And that is one of the key issues in today's AI, where the technologies on a secular basis are moving very fast in capabilities. Just notice how fast we've transitioned from chatbots to AI agents. Both are growing fast, mind you, but the newer thing is growing faster. That's the good news. And all of it requires a lot of compute. And that's the bad news, because compute, as you've talked about on a whole bunch of shows and posts of late, takes time. Everyone's trying to build many gigawatts of data centers. 1 gigawatt data center, rule of thumb, is about $50 billion. And that's why you have all the big tech companies spending cumulatively over $700 billion this year alone, and bigger numbers that are envisioned in the next year and the year after, which obviously builds a lot of lock-in demand for companies like NVIDIA that we've talked about. So everyone is seeing this exponential demand from an investor point of view. Then everyone's saying, okay, where are the returns? And the returns in every tech wave take longer than we like. And in this case, with multiple waves going on, the multiple technologies that have to be absorbed, adopted, figured out, and deployed in companies at just massive scale effort, it just takes a long time. So it just keeps convincing me is that this stuff is going to take a lot longer, despite the best efforts and biggest investments by these CEOs into these technologies. Everyone's leaning in, but it's hard work. And so that is the endless reality of AI deployment. So you've got this breathless excitement over AI on the one hand, and that this endless reality of diffusing it and getting enterprises to adopt it, etc. And this is, by the way, true at the individual level too. I've written several posts and I've talked about them in the recent days about how just, as individually, I'm really working hard with a lot of these AI agents and technologies, and I'm very excited about using them. But there is a lot of endless reality, I would say, drudgery. And I've talked about this in terms of the steep learning curve of adopting this, figuring it out, etc. And so we're in this stage, and when you take something that is very difficult at an individual level and multiply it in an enterprise scale, it just takes longer than we like. So those are the two major news items that I wanted to highlight. Again, this will be up in a written form, etc., that you can take a look at in future posts. But I just wanted to highlight these two items. The third thing I wanted to talk about is an extension of something that a theme that I've talked about for a while, for the last couple of years, which is that I've stressed that we are and continue to be in what I call the mainframe age of AI, meaning all the AI compute that we're building are going to be served by these multi-hundred-billion-dollar investments in AI data centers, etc. If you want to query things from a chatbot or AI agents, you have to talk to a central computer, much like in the mainframe days of computing 40, 50, 60 years ago. And then obviously over 50 years, that transitioned to the personal computer starting in the early 80s to smartphones today. As we know, these things are as powerful as a supercomputer of 40, 50 years ago. So we went from mainframe to PCs over, let's say, 5, 6 decades. I've said for 3 or 4 years now that we're going to see that cycle, mainframe to PCs and smartphones, compressed to 5 to 10 years, as these things have more capabilities, GPUs, CPUs, memory, to run a lot of AI locally on these devices and on your local computers, like the AIs that run on my Mac Minis here. So that's the good news on that front. The bad news, as I've said in a number of posts, is that because of the current limited scale of manufacturing the semiconductor chips, so it's TSMC for the GPUs in Taiwan, it's SK Hynix, Samsung, Micron to make the memory chips. Those companies are growing as fast as possible, creating multi-billion-dollar fabs, but they don't have enough capacity for the demand for AI over the next 2 or 3 years. So what does that mean? That means there's a big transition of chips being allocated away from local computing for computers and smartphones to the AI side of the equation. And I've written a lot about this. I said that means that prices for computers, prices for smartphones are going to go up. And the third piece of news I wanted to talk about today is we saw more indication of that, which is Microsoft, which is one of the biggest producers of the showcase computers, laptops called the Surface line, basically had 30, 40, 50% increases in pricing for their top of the line next generation Surface laptops. So prices generally going from $800-900 to $1,400-1,500. And we've seen this trend all through the last few months. You've seen the Sony PlayStation talk about their prices going up. Microsoft, again, on the Xbox side, increasing prices 30, 40%. And this is not just related to trade kerfuffles with China, tariffs and the like. This is actual shortage of chips. And the world is trying to make more chips, but it's not coming on fast enough. So for the next anywhere from 2 to 3 years plus, there is a shortage. And so that slows down the mainframe to local AI computing trend that I've been talking about. So not necessarily in terms of time. I still think we're going to see a lot more local computing over the next 3 to 5 years. But the number of people who are able to upgrade to the more advanced computers and smartphones with higher amounts of memory, storage, etc., are going to be fewer. Now, in a world of 5 billion smartphone users, the numbers are still going to be very large, tens of millions and hundreds of millions. So the stocks, from an investment point of view, will still see big opportunities up and down in these things. But there is a stretching out potential of this mainframe to local AI computing because of this memory and chip price shortage thing and pricing issue that is very now coming into force. Almost every day we have news items. So that is the third thing I wanted to talk about, which takes us to the the gadgets and AI section, one of my favorite sections of this AI Ramblings discussion every day. And one of the things, if you travel extensively, one of the bane of one's existence is on a plane. If it's 2-3 hours or 5 hours, is internet connection, and that's been very slow, almost dial-up speed type of stuff. And in recent months, we've seen higher speed bandwidth, especially through SpaceX Starlink service being deployed on airplanes. And that gives on some of those planes, if you're lucky enough to be on a United flight, et cetera, that has that equipment, gives you much, almost like being in your office or home type of speeds, 100 to megabits. But now Amazon, which is launching its own LEO satellite network to compete against Starlink, is signing up airlines as well with a new antenna design that is going to give as much as a gigabit type of speed, which is kind of cool. It'll again take 2 or 3 years because they've got to launch a lot more satellites, a few thousand planned in the next 2 or 3 years. Again, I'll have all these notes in the show notes that you can look at in terms of the detail. But this is important, number one, because it's a cool gadget. It will meaningfully change our lives from a mobility point of view. And the bigger thing about satellite bandwidth services like this are not just the planes, obviously. The big holy grail are direct satellite to your phone ongoing bandwidth connections. So almost bypassing the phone companies, as it were. And Apple in particular is very focused about this, on this opportunity. And I've written a lot about this in post number 100. Apple has an investment in a satellite company called Globalstar. So expect a lot of M&A and partnerships and so on in this space as these satellite networks go on. And it's a very exciting topic. So I wanted to talk about this bandwidth, satellite bandwidth to local devices, mobile or not. And it's a very important trend to kind of watch as it rolls out over the next 2 to 3 years. Which brings us to, I just wanted to touch on a couple of questions I got from listeners and readers and viewers. One is just because, this is our 4th daily AI Rambling show, a video podcast every day. And as you all know, I also publish daily the AI Reset to Zero. So there was a question on what's the difference, what to expect between those two. And the answer is both are different communications. Because I spend so much time thinking about AI issues, I found it, I thought it would be useful to have a medium where I can talk about my views as opposed to just write about them. So they're very different pieces of content. So if you get AI Reset to Zero in the morning, it's a very different set of things I'm going to talk about on the podcast side. They may overlap in some high-level elements, but you're going to hopefully learn different things. And on the video side, besides the 20, 25, 30-minute show, we'll also have short 2-minute clips or even shorter 1-minute clips where you can just sample specific things I'm talking about. So the idea is to give people the message, as it were, through a variety of medium, or medium is the message, as Marshall McLuhan says. So, and all of this is free. It's you can subscribe to all of it on the Substack. I'll have links in the notes again. Michael Parekh, Substack.com. There is a section for AI-RTZ. There's a section for AI Ramblings. They're on both different paths of publishing, etc. So it's all very clear, hopefully there, and so you can take a look at that. The second question we got from readers is the business of one question. What are my 2 favorite sources of information on a daily basis? And as you can imagine, I consume dozens, if not hundreds, of sources every day on things that are related to tech and AI, and I have so many ones that I can name. I can eventually, if you guys would like, let me know, and I'll put up a fuller list in future publications. But my core daily source on the tech side for tech and now AI news is a service called TechMeme, TechMeme. Again, I'll put the link in the show notes. It's by a friend of mine, Gabe Rivera, who's been running this thing for, I think, over 2.5 decades now. It's a great aggregation service of anything that's going on in tech every day, fresh on a rolling basis. And it's one of my core go-to sources every day. On the podcast side of the equation, there's so many great tech and AI and VC podcasts, obviously, everything from A16Z to the All In Podcast guys, etc. And you just saw TBPN just acquired by OpenAI as an example. On the gadget side, my favorite tech gadget podcast is the Vergecast, which is by The Verge, and there's a Friday episode hosted by their two senior folk, David Pierce and Eli Patel, and that's one of my favorite ones, just because they do a good job talking about gadgets and the business, sometimes the business, but a lot of the experiential aspects of technology, which I think is very key to being an investor in general, to understand viscerally what it is like to experience these things as they change so rapidly. So that's one of my favorite tech gadget podcasts. So I thought I'd mention that. Obviously, I like MKBHD, both his main side and his Waveform podcast, but the Vergecast is my favorite. So I thought I'd mention that and give them a shout out. So that rounds out our show, episode 54 for today, Tuesday. Again, as usual, shoot questions, any comments on any of the things we've talked about. And as usual, it would be wonderful if you could like and subscribe. And otherwise, we'll see you again tomorrow for episode 55. Thanks for joining.